today? Good. It's good to see you. You brought your Bibles, turn to Matthew chapter 5. Continuing through the Sermon on the Mount, which has the theme of us both learning and then living out the character of Christ. And continuing through these passages where Jesus, as He taught then and as He still teaches us now through His Word, takes what was the standard, what was viewed as acceptable, how the world did live, and say, no, that's not going to cut it. You really want to reflect me in the world around you. You really want to be like me in your daily living, and we should all desire that and strive for that. Then this is really where I'm going to set the bar. And you know what, if I'm honest, just one of these weeks, I want to read one of these passages and just hear Jesus say, you're doing pretty good here. That's enough. We don't have to raise the standard here. But He's not done it yet. And I don't reckon He's going to either. Because see, I think when we are in a relationship with Christ, with us having His prompting on our life to represent to the world, or represent Him to the world around us, we're always going to be in this tension of, man, we need to take it another step further, and how clearly we can reflect His character throughout our lives. And today we talk about, and we start, as Cody read, it may sound familiar, the idea of as Christians, us not being able to get that kind of flesh, or get even, or strike back, or level the field. Lots of different phrases have been put on this whole concept of retaliation, which is something our culture is obsessed with. That if someone wrongs us, we want the ability to get even. And if I'm honest, even in my own life, there's times where I want it to be vengeance is mine, thus saith Him. That I can go out and get even with some of the wrongs that have been done to me. And I think we're all there. In fact, I'm going to move past this opening pretty quickly, because I don't want to see you all start to scribble out your revenge plans. I want you to take sermon notes as we go through this. But we've all been in times where we would love to get even. And someone wronged us, and that caused some level of harm or pain, and we would like to get to inflict that back on them, or inflict something that causes them to hurt the way that we've hurt. And Jesus says, no, that's not how you're going to live your life. That when we connect our lives with Him, our ethics and our living and how we interact with all the things that are wrong about this world, and there is plenty that's wrong about this world, how we live in the midst of those things is going to have to look different than what the rest of the world will view as acceptable. So before we dig much further into this theme, let's stop and let's just pray for a moment. God, we thank You for today. We thank You for our time together. We thank You that You are a God who constantly challenges us. And while that's often uncomfortable, You do it because that helps us be more like You. And when we're more like You, we get to reflect You clearer to the world around us. And God, I pray that as we look at this tough topic this morning, God, and as we compare that to our own lives and our own hearts, God, I think it's reasonable to say there's situations where we would all like to get even. Would all like a little revenge. Would all like to see someone go through a little pain because of what they've done to us. And if we got to be a part of inflicting it, that'd be okay with us too. God, help show us how that does not line up with Your character. And help us to all be willing to be challenged by You. Be challenged by You on how we are supposed to respond when people wrong us, either intentionally or unintentionally. God, thank You for Your Word. Thank You for our time together. And help our ears and our hearts to be open to what You would want to say to us. It's in Your name we pray. Amen. So I'm going to reference back real quick to the verses that Cody already read, but I'm going to start in reading verse 38. It says, You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, don't resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. So let's look at that first concept of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, because Jesus is going to immediately say, don't try to get even. And for sure, don't result to violent aggression or emotional damaging aggression or any sort of method of inflicting intentional pain, be it emotional, relational, spiritual, or physical, on someone else just because they wronged you. Now, this whole concept of eye for an eye was rooted in what was called the lex talionis, which would translate today from Latin to English to mean the law of retaliation. So the law of retaliation is where we get this concept of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But that wasn't given for all of us to interact. That wasn't meant to where if Cody gives me a black eye, I need to give him one back. No, this was given to the court system. This was for legal matters only, so that the court had the overarching guiding principle that the punishment should fit the crime. There should be some correlation there between what someone does and how they were punished. It's not meant to be a governing factor of all of our relationships. No, that was isolated to a legal system today. Even with that in place, we still should have been operating off a different set of ethics, because the whole eye for an eye is a horrible way to try to manage conflict or pain within relationships. In fact, one thing I read this week that I just really struck a chord with me says the law was thus being dragged into the personal arena. And the law meaning that whole eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. If someone hurts me, I get to hurt them back. Someone hurts someone I love, I get to hurt their family back. What's being said is when that was dragged into the personal arena where it could scarcely foster even rough justice. Meaning, even if we try to apply that to our interpersonal relationships, it's really not justice. It just turns back into this back and forth fight of who can escalate and impact the most pain. And then what the sentence went on to say, so it couldn't foster justice. It only grew bitterness, vengeance, malice, and hatred. Because this concept of I'm going to get even, I'm going to get my pound of flesh, it never stops. Because even if we felt we got to do something proportional to that other person, one of two things will happen. One, they will raise that up a level, and then we have to go back and raise that up a level. Or one, let's say that hypothetically in a relationship, someone intentionally wrongs us, so we do the exact same thing right back to us. We don't gain any satisfaction from that. I've talked with people who have tried this, and no one has ever had a conversation with me that went, you know what? They did X, so I did X right back, and solved everything, and I feel so much more whole and fulfilled. No, it just creates more damage. And it just complicates an already very complicated situation. Jesus is going to say, look, you've got a legal system that was built on eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. And to be clear, I don't think Jesus had a problem with that being used in courts. Because God is a God of justice. But he said, when you all try to take that from a legal principle to a relational one, it just created this ever-growing snowballing dynamic of hurt and damage and pain that there is no end to. Because you're just going to keep going back and forth. And Jesus is going to say, don't entertain vengeance, because it's not going to get you anywhere. Paul would write about this same theme in Romans chapter 12, beginning in verses 17. He says, never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you are honorable. Do all that you can do to live in peace with everyone. Dear friends, never take revenge. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. For the scripture says, I will take revenge. I will pay them back, says the Lord. Instead, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals of shame on their heads. Don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good. There's going to be a common theme as we live in God's grace and leadership and try to live out His character, that vengeance and retaliation have no place in our lives. There's just none. And that's a really hard pill to swallow sometimes. Because all of us have wanted to get even. And all of us have probably stayed up in the middle of the night some night thinking, man, if I could just do this, I would feel so much better. No, you won't. It's just going to make things worse. And God says, you let me handle that. And you let me handle you. So He puts, Jesus, as He starts on this theme, is going to put away the concept of an eye for an eye. Because it never belonged in the personal realm in the first place. But He's definitely going to say, look, you can't live your life like this. For two reasons. One, it doesn't honor the Lord. And second, it doesn't bring us anything good at all to try to be a part of this growing, evolving snowball effect of pain and damage and trying to outdo someone else in what they can cause. Jesus says, don't have a part of this. He's going to go on, and as I already read in the last part of verse 39, I'm going to read it again real quick. And this is the one this is just, it's not even fun to read. Like, no one likes this. It says, but I tell you, don't resist the evildoer. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, then turn the other to him also. And Jesus is being both literal and figurative here. But Jesus is saying, look, try to live at peace. Try not to get evil. And there's a couple things at play here. One is, if someone slaps us, we expect the ability to slap them back. And that really doesn't solve much. Now you both got a black eye and no one will. But what He's going to say is, try to put on the character of Christ in those moments. Now let's look at the figurative side more as not a literal slap. I think even Jesus has allowance for it. You can protect yourself, but probably don't stand there and just engage in a fist fight just because they started it. So let's look at this in the more relational, emotional, that realm. Where He says, when someone wrongs you, don't give in to the urge just to turn around and wrong them back. Don't get into anything you can say, I can say meaner. Any action you can do, I can do in spades and hurt more. Put that kind of thinking away. Leave that to the world system, because you don't live like this. This isn't why I gave my life. This isn't the character which you need to take on. And so turn the other cheek. Try to create peace. Show them love and forgiveness. So as believers, when someone wrongs us and a friend around us says, you're going to let them get away with that? The answer as believers is almost always going to be yeah. Because what can I do anyway that's going to move the needle at all? Get even? No, it's not going to work. It's just going to create more pain and damage. And on that theme, that word slapped, it's an important word. And what we don't necessarily see in the English, but if we go back to the Greek, when Jesus uses that particular word, and again, Greek's very complex, but when He uses that exact phrase to describe a slap, it's the same phrase that was used to describe when Jesus, during His crucifixion beatings, was mocked with a slap. Meaning that part of refusing to get even and refusing to retaliate is meaning we're going to have to put our own ego to the side. and let our pride be bruised a little bit, and let the other person get away with a few things. It's hard to swallow. This is what it looks like when we talk about reflecting the character of Christ, like our this year's teaching theme is. And when we talk about reflecting the world around us, sometimes we think all that means is we have to be nice to each other. No, it goes deeper into things like this and how we respond to people who intentionally inflict pain on our lives. Then we get into the verse on the lawsuit. Lawsuits were heavily threatened that day. And lawsuits are still threatened today all the time with no merit. Someone told me once, I think I can sue you. And I'm going, for what? I didn't do anything. How frivolous those threats were made then, and how frivolous they're made now. And we read in verse 40, as for the one who wants to sue you and take away your shirt, let him have your cloak as well. So you've got the whole concept of they're going to sue you. And Jesus is going to challenge us to have a radically unselfish attitude when people are just angry and wanting to drill down on us. Not that we would try to grow that or be part of that conflict, but that we would try to diffuse it, and we would just be gracious and kind and loving. Because Jesus is going to say, if they try to sue you for your shirt, if they want to inflict this level of pain, voluntarily give them your cloak as well. So you've got two different articles of clothing being referenced here. You've got the shirt and you've got the cloak. The shirt was more lightweight. It was not particularly expensive. It was not particularly valuable. It's at the closest to the skin, really not that big a deal. But Jesus is saying, if someone's doing something to you that's not that big of a deal, instead of trying to respond to that, just put it all to rest and offer him your cloak too. The cloak was more valuable. It was thicker. It sat on top. So just like I've got an undershirt on, and this one was free at some sort of conference, this one actually had to pay for it, Kohl's. All right? So one's not valuable at all. Really, one is much more valuable. The cloak could be used to keep you warm. It could be used for bedding as you travel around the countryside, like Jesus and his followers traveled around the countryside. And Jesus, yes, he's saying, and I think he really would have been like, look, followers, if someone's going to sue you for your shirt, just give him your cloak too. Show him character and love and grace and get on with it. But there's the overriding principle here is when someone's trying to inflict some level of pain, be overwhelming in the graciousness of your response. Be overwhelming in the kindness and the love that you show that individual who's probably responding and acting out of their own pain or anyway. Jesus is saying, man, just in every response you have, no matter what they're trying to do, no matter what they're trying to harm you with, just respond with as much love and grace and charitable generosity as possible. Maybe this goes completely against how we want to respond in the way the world around us, in the way good men, friends, and family will tell us we should respond. This is tough stuff. I wasn't lying when I told you this was a tough week of bread, was it? Jesus says, be as loving and kind and charitable as possible. And then we get into the go the extra mile concept. Let's read the last two verses of our passage today. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to the one who asked you, and don't turn away from the one who wants to borrow. Now, there's nothing hypothetical about going the extra mile as Jesus taught. Jews were situated and lived in a Roman province. They're living underneath the Roman government. The Roman government was rather abusive. And they made every effort to make sure everyone knew who was in charge, and that was Rome. And a Roman soldier could force a Jew or any other non-Roman citizen to carry their pack for a mile. So if you're walking down the road, you're out for a walk on North Oak traffic, and a Roman soldier comes up next to you because you're not a Roman citizen, they automatically have power over you, and they can say, you're going to carry my pack, which would probably equate to about 40 pounds or so, rather heavy and unpleasant. You're going to carry this for the next mile so I can take a break. And this would have struck a chord with the Jews because it reminded them that they were second-class citizens in their own homeland. This would have damaged their ego, would have caused embarrassment, would have been humiliating. No doubt that Roman soldier probably came across with an aura of arrogance and pride and demeaning. And Jesus is going to say, no matter what someone's trying to do with you, continue to show them love and grace well beyond what they deserve. Well beyond what they deserve. Because if that soldier wants to force you to go 1 mile, which is their legal right, do it for a second. Go well beyond what's expected of you, well beyond what culture demands. Jesus isn't looking for us to make proportional responses with love and grace. He's always for looking us to take that a bit further to a disproportional response of love and grace. So if we ever thought we've done due diligence at being kind and forgiving and gracious to someone that wrongs us, when we measure that against Christ's expectations, rarely will we have done it. Because He's going to challenge us to take that even further. To show even more love and grace and kindness. Because that's the kind of God He is, and that's the kind of God that He wants represented to the world around us. It is the go the extra mile. Not just to show effort, but because that is that second mile that goes well beyond what that person would have expected in receiving kindness and charity from us. Jesus says, always do more than what would seem necessary in being kind and loving and forgiving to those who are trying to inflict pain on you. And this is not the response we default to. This is not the response that we think we should be required. This is not the response that maybe even our most well-meaning friends and families are going to encourage us to do. But it's the response Jesus beckons us to try to live out. It's the response that Jesus says, this is how I want you to represent me to that individual. So not that they'll focus on you, but that their attention will be piqued and they'll focus on me. So I want us to wrap up by looking at 3 reasons. In our title today, if you're taking notes, this is where the notes pick up. The 3 reasons why we should refuse to retaliate. 3 reasons why our lives should not be focused on getting even or our pound of flesh. 3 reasons why this actually makes sense to us as believers. The first is we trust God with the results. One reason why it makes sense for me and you to always try to extend more grace than necessary and more kindness and love is because we trust God with the end results of the situation. Now, even as I wrote this, my first thought was, right, I trust God to get that person on my behalf. Right? And He might. And He can. Never doubt that. And never doubt that if we're trying to inflict pain. We sure don't want God to get even with us on that person's behalf. It's real nasty real quick. And not only do we need to focus on trusting God with the results of that person, but we need to remember He doesn't need our love. And I have to throw that in there for me, because I've told my dad before. My dad has just drilled this into me and a lot of different Don't mess with it. God will take care of it. Well, yeah, but God needs my help to inflict pain on others. No, we don't. So, yeah, sure, we can trust God with whatever will happen to that person. But that's not even our concern in life. We need to trust God with the results of our life and what He can do to work in these situations. And whatever healing or recovery needs to take place. You know, there's a lot of instances to where people may reach out and try to inflict pain on our lives, and they may be very successful. That can come in financial pain. Maybe they find a way to cheat you out of a lot of money, or put you in a situation where they took advantage or they stepped on you in such a way that had a trickle-down financial cost. Well, then we trust God with our needs and trust God with our life after that. Maybe it's emotional. Maybe what someone did to you caused a lot of pain. Pain that will take years or decades to recover from. We still trust God that He can recover us from that. And He can do the healing and the redemption in the midst of all that. Trust God with the relationships you separate. God will redeem that and bring good. The ways that people will reflect pain, can inflict pain in our lives are pretty limitless. There's a lot of ways we can do damage to one another here on earth. But there's no way that someone can do harm to us that God can't overcome. And that God can't recover and redeem us from that. So we trust God with the results of what He'll do in our life through that situation. And we leave that other person alone. Because they're not our concern. And if God wants to do something in response to their actions, that's His business, not ours. We just trust God with the results of our life and what He's going to do and how He's going to walk us through that situation. So the first reason why it makes sense for us to refuse to retaliate is because we trust God with the results. The second is because our ethics require it. Biblical teaching, biblical ethics, biblical living require that we refuse to retaliate. And we don't get to cherry pick the parts of the Bible that we live out. So if we come to a teaching like that today, we don't get to say, well, I don't think that's no longer valid, as it is. If we're going to strike out and try to get even with someone, in light of today's teaching, we at least need to be willing to admit ourselves, I know this is bad for me and this is wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway. But man, if we're going to be serious about being believers and individuals and friends and family and co-workers and neighbors who reflect the character of Christ, then the standard we draw from biblical teaching says, don't mess with trying to get even. Just trust God with your life. Honor Him and let Him take care of the results. The standard we live by doesn't give room for us to dabble in this area of the world system, but rather calls us to rise above it. Michelle Obama, in response to some political bullying that was going on, coined the phrase, when they go low, we go high. And I think that's a fitting tagline for our concept today. If someone in the world around us inflicts pain, we refuse to sink to that level. You know, if you watch a sports team, and we've all seen this in a different game, and it happens in every sports. Sometimes a much lesser talented, lesser coach, lesser all along the line will come in and whip up and humiliate a much better team. Because the more qualified team, the more talented team, the better coached team played down to the level of their competition. And they got beat because of it. And we live in a world of people who are hurting and lashing out, who want to live their lives in particular ways, and they're willing to inflict pain on other people because of it. We live in a world who's very insensitive to the impact our lives have on other people. we allow ourselves to play down to that way of thinking, we're going to get good every single time. It's not good for us. It's not what the Lord has for us. These aren't just arbitrary rules. This is how God says this is the best way to live your life. Don't play down to the level of the world system, because we are called to live our lives at a much higher level. Third reality, we've hit on this a lot, we'll wrap up with it quickly, is we represent the Lord. We got to remember that. We represent the Lord to the world around us. When we connect our lives with Christ, we become the picture of God to people who aren't looking anywhere else to see what God is like. How many of you all have heard that line, your reputation precedes you? Often that line is used in a positive light. Like an individual may go into a job interview for a promotion, and then the interviewer or the boss says, your reputation precedes you. You've got a good reputation. The reality is that's true if you have a bad reputation too. It still precedes you. It's still there. And one thing we got to remember as Christians is we represent Christ whether we're doing a good job of it or not. Because for sure, when we have vocally connected our lives with the Lord, but we don't back that up with the way we live, especially in situations like this and how we treat people in response to their actions or attitudes or words or however it is they inflicted pain. If we represent Him poorly, that's still the picture they see. We represent the Lord, whether we're doing a good job or not. Now, just to be clear, we don't get to represent table flipping Jesus in these instances. We represent the God of all grace that we lean on, and the God of love and kindness and forgiveness. And none of this is pleasant, and it requires a lot of self-discipline. And it requires a lot of biting your tongue, or not sending sin on the text message, or not repaying evil for evil, or putting our pride aside and saying, God, everything about me wants to do this, but I know you've got something better for me. I know that rising above this is the best way for me to live my life spiritually and practically. And this is really hard to apply. This one takes, man, some of the stuff we talk about, this one takes an immense amount of self-discipline. We may not always have a crowd around us encouraging us to take the high. I hope we do. But nonetheless, Jesus hits some hard stuff today on how thoroughly we are supposed to be people of love and kindness and forgiveness. How we have to trust Him no matter what anyone here on earth does to us. Now, this is the hardest to apply in an ongoing situation. And so my challenge is always, okay, when we're trying to live this out and when we mess it up, go back and do the next right thing. Just get it right the next time. Just honor the Lord in this area of our lives the next opportunity we have. And He'll still use that just as well. Let's pray.